Good afternoon, everyone. We're very pleased to have with us today the Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Ted Chaiban, who, as you know, recently was visiting both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, including both Gaza and the West Bank. So he will be here to talk to you about that. Mr. Chaiban, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. I just returned from a 5-day mission to Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and I speak to you with a deep sense of urgency and profound concern today. This has been my 4th visit to Gaza since the war began after the horrors of October 7th. Of course, itself building on decades of an unresolved conflict. You see the images on the news and you know what has happened, but it's still shocking when you're there. The marks of deep suffering and hunger are visible on the faces of families and children. Over 18,000 children have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of the war. That's an average of 28 children a day, the size of a classroom gone. Children have lost loved ones, they're hungry, they're scared, they're traumatized. And Gaza now faces a grave risk of famine. I know this is something that's been building up, but we now have 2 indicators that have exceeded the famine threshold. 1 in 3 people in Gaza are going days without food, and the malnutrition indicator has exceeded the famine threshold, with global acute malnutrition now at over 16.5%. Today, more than 320,000 young children are at risk of acute malnutrition. On Monday, when I was in Gaza, I met with the families of the 10 children killed and 19 injured by an Israeli airstrike while they were queuing for food with their mothers and fathers at a distribution clinic, a nutrition clinic in Deir al-Ballah that UNICEF supports. We met with Ahmad, who's 10 years old, and his father. Ahmad was in line with his sister, Samah, 13-year-old, on that day. She died. There's a picture I saw of him in a donkey cart waving furiously to see if he could save her and get her to the hospital, but he was unable to. And he's deeply traumatized. He doesn't know what to do, and this should simply not be happening. These children are not victims of a natural disaster. They're being starved, bombed, and displaced. We went to a stabilization center in Gaza City, and I met acutely malnourished infants whose bodies were little more than skin and bone. Their mothers sat nearby, desperate and exhausted. One mother told me that she no longer produces breast milk. She herself is too hungry. And UNICEF is doing everything we can to address the situation, supporting breastfeeding, providing infant formula, treating children with severe acute malnutrition. But the needs are enormous after 22 months of war. There was a 2-month of blockade, which has now been eased, but still having an impact, and the aid is not getting in fast enough or at the required scale as of yet. In the midst of all this, our staff in Gaza, most of whom have suffered devastating personal losses, continue to work day and night. UNICEF is delivering safe water, 2.4 million liters per day in northern Gaza, for example, reaching 600,000 children. That's an average of 5 to 6 liters per day per person. Better than what they had before, but still below survival thresholds. We rebuilt the cold chain for vaccines. You recall the polio campaign in February. We've continued to vaccinate children against childhood illnesses. We're providing psychosocial care for children who have been horrified by what they've gone through. We're keeping newborn children alive, helping to reunite separated families, both within the Strip, but also in some cases internationally, and delivering infant formula to the most vulnerable babies, but much more needs to be done. There has been some easing of humanitarian access after the pauses announced by Israel. As UNICEF, we have 1,500 trucks of life-saving supplies ready across corridors in Egypt, Jordan, Ashdod, and Turkey. Some have begun to move, and we've delivered in the last couple of days 33 trucks of life-saving infant formula, high-energy biscuits, and hygiene kits. But this is still a fraction of what's needed. And so a big part of the mission has been our advocacy and engagement with the Israeli authorities in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. We pressed for a review of military rules of engagement to protect civilians and children. Children should not be getting killed waiting in line at a nutrition center or collecting water, and people should not be so desperate that they rush a convoy to get food. We called for more humanitarian aid and commercial traffic to come in, moving closer to 500 trucks a day to stabilize the situation and reduce the desperation of the population, and also the looting. We call it self-distribution when the population goes after a convoy, and there's also looting when more armed groups go after it because the prices of food are so high. And in order to address that, we need to flood the strip with goods from all channels, all gates. And this is not going to be achieved through humanitarian aid alone, so we also pressed for commercial goods to get into the strip. Eggs, milk, other essential supplies that can complement what the humanitarian community can bring in. And then we press for dual-use items and fuel to be allowed in so that the water system can be prepared, pipes, fittings, generators. It's very hot in Gaza right now, 40 degrees centigrade, and water is in short supply with the risk of disease outbreak looming everywhere. And we need to continue to advocate so that the humanitarian pauses do not lead to further displacement, pressing the population into an ever smaller area. It was a good exchange. There has been some easing in the access, and we need to see the full realization of the measures announced and the issues that I just raised in order to be able to address the situation. I should also say that I visited the West Bank, where there too children are under threat. So far this year, 39 Palestinian children have been killed in the West Bank. I visited the Bedouin community east of Ramallah, which was forcibly displaced due to violence. We also met with Israeli children impacted by the war, children who have endured fear, loss, and displacement. The children don't start wars, but they're the ones who are impacted by the wars. But today I want to keep the focus on Gaza because it's in Gaza where the suffering is most acute and where children are dying at an unprecedented rate. We are at a crossroad, and the choices made now will determine whether tens of thousands of children live or die. And we know what must be done and what can be done. The UN and non-governmental organizations that form the humanitarian community can address this, along with commercial traffic, if the measures are in place to allow access and eventually have enough goods in the strip that some of the issues that are there with law and order abates. And of course, funding is needed. UNICEF's appeal for Gaza is critically underfunded, with, for example, only 30% of health and nutrition needs covered. And then finally, and we need to remember that the humanitarian pause is not a ceasefire. We hope that the parties can agree on a ceasefire, the release of the hostages by Hamas and other groups. This has gone on for far too long, 22 months. I honestly never expected that we would be here 22 months into this war. What is happening on the ground is inhumane, and what children needs from all communities is a sustained ceasefire and a political way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn the floor over for questions. Amelie?
Thank you. On behalf of the UN Correspondent Association, thank you very much for doing this briefing. I'm Amélie Botelier from AFP News Agency. I have two questions. In the last few days, a lot of countries have started, more and more countries are airdropping aid into Gaza. Do you see that as making any difference? And my second question is, if, as you demanded, aid was to flow again into Gaza, how long would it be for one child? We know they are vulnerable human beings, so how long would it take to have all these children get back into health, not being undernourished and back to health again? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Look, at this stage, every modality needs to be used. Every gate, every route, every modality. But airdrops cannot replace the volume and the scale that convoys by road can achieve. And what's needed is simply not feasible in terms of volume, in terms of access through airdrops. And so try every modality, but what's clearly needed is to move back towards a volume of around 500 trucks a day through all routes, and that includes both humanitarian aid and commercial, as I've said. Just to give you an example, the price of a kilo of wheat flour right before the pause was announced was hovering between 100 and 150 new Israeli shekels. We're talking at 100 new Israeli shekel, that's $30 for a kilo of wheat. You can imagine what that means. Just by slightly more aid coming in, slightly more traffic going in, it's now gone down to between 35 and 45 new Israeli shekel. That's an indication that you can quickly have an impact on the market, but also the availability of food, but much more needs to be done. In terms of children recovering, let me answer it in two ways. A child who's malnourished, who has access to ready-to-use therapeutic food, whose mother also has access to specialized foods, and who has access to proteins, because that's also what you need when you're pregnant and lactating. They will physically recover relatively quickly if those supplies are sustained. But they need the specialized food, and then they need the food, their regular daily intake. And the mother needs to eat so she can breastfeed as well. If that happens, they can physically recover. But the sequels, in terms of the emotional well-being, the risk of stunting, the mental health of the child, will get worse and worse the longer the child is in the situation that it's in. So, we really need to look at things holistically. Similarly, part of the reason why we're pushing not just for food and nutritional supplement, but also for clean water, so preparing the water systems for health, is because nutrition requires a multifaceted response. And the child and his or her mother also requires access to water and sanitation. There's sewage openly running through towns, people with skin diseases. So it needs to be addressed in a multifaceted way.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Thank you very much for the briefing. Gabriel Zondo from Al Jazeera English. Is Israel still preventing baby formula from getting into the Strip?
Specifically, no, it is not. And in fact, we had a discussion with the Israeli authorities, and they asked us to do everything possible to increase the amount of infant formula and other therapeutic foods that go in. The issue then is the modalities. How do you kind of cut down on the bureaucracy so that the turnaround for the trucks are faster? How to open up all of the gates simultaneously so that they're at less risk of being looted. Open up several routes so that anyone who's either trying to do a self-distribution or is trying to make money out of the traffic can be less, it's less predictable where the truck is going to come. And again, allow commercial goods so that there's more on the market, more accessible so people can feed themselves. But there has been support for the commodities going in.
And if I may ask a quick follow-up, you said there are 33 trucks, UNICEF trucks that have, can you clarify, have they gotten into Gaza, or they're soon to get into Gaza, or what's the...
Yeah, we had, to be clear, we had 97 trucks go in recent days, of which 33 focused on, infant feeds, sanitation kits, and so altogether those have gotten into Gaza, and we're picking up more on a daily basis. But we're also being strategic about how we move in batches, so that we're less predictable, we're less subject to the food not getting to the end point, because again, for specialized items like nutritional supplements, you want to get it to the nutrition center and the health center where those malnourished children are.
Deshi?
Yes, Mr. Chaiban, this is Shudoji with China Central Television. Allow me to show you a video I just saw today as a YouTube advertisement this morning.
Israel has been facilitating a massive humanitarian operation for the people of Gaza. Day and night, Israel enables food, medicine, and more without limitations, from baby formula to antibiotics.
You see those smiling faces, the children. You just visited Gaza yourself. Is this the image you see? If it's not, what's the danger of the wrong information online, especially for YouTube advertisement? Thank you.
I mean, look, that's not the image you see, okay? And there's plenty of information in social media. You all have been reporting on the situation, which shows that...
Sorry, I have to offer you another information. This is actually from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel.
Right.
They put this advertisement on YouTube.
Right, okay.
We're aware of that, yes. And I believe World Food Program has put out some lines debunking some of the veracity of the videos, some of which are taken from other years.
Right. So, but, at this stage, I think what we need to focus on, as I said in my comments, the situation is desperate. People are gaunt. Their eyes are hollow. It's an extremely difficult situation. The markets are bare. Children, are in stabilization centers because if they don't get the specialized foods that we're able to get to them through 170 clinics that we're still operating. When I say we, partners in working with UNICEF, and if they don't get to that clinic, then they're on the verge of dying, basically. All of that is the situation. Israel, since the blockade has been lifting, has eased access, and the purpose of the mission was to advocate for the measures that I discussed to fully implement access. And again, let the UN and the NGOs do their work, because we know how to do the work, and complement that with commercial traffic.
Noreen?
Thank you very much, sir. This is Noreen Hussein with IPS News. Earlier you mentioned that there's that commercial goods also need to get through into Gaza, but that there's been little support in facilitating their entry. I wonder if you could just clarify on what are some of the challenges that have been faced with commercial goods getting into Gaza compared to humanitarian aid? Thank you.
So the government of Israel will say that they are concerned about commercial goods going into Gaza because they feel that the private sector will be taxed by Hamas, or will make payments in order to get the goods through. Our point is that the situation is so desperate that you need all routes in and all channels in. And there are ways. there are businessmen in the West Bank and Israel who have a relationship with businessmen on the ground, that they can find kind of a bilateral arrangement so that some of the goods go in. There are certain products, certain goods that the United Nations can't and won't bring in on a sustained regular basis. Like I said, eggs, protein, and so feeding 2 million people under the circumstances that we are now requires all hands on deck. Our colleagues from WFP, ourselves, and the World Central Kitchen, other NGOs can do a big part of what's needed. The Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, ICRC, Egyptian Red Crescent, Qatar Charities, everyone will chip in. But you also need the private sector to do it. And again, the situation is such that it's absolutely essential. Certainly, there was something in the dialogue which the authorities at least were listening, but we need to see it happen, essentially.
By that you mean the Israeli authorities?
Yes.
Yep. Are there any further questions? Anything online? I haven't received any requests online, but if there is, please feel free to ask. Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, thank you, and let's hope that this is the last time that we have to talk about this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And in about 10 minutes, we'll start the Daily Noon Briefing.